Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action, Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers, in keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. We ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the 12th session of the 6th cycle of the workshop that was presented on July 13th, 2024, where we finished step 10. Next week, we'll begin step 11. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before beginning the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. I hope you enjoy the workshop. And if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further, please feel free to contact me. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. So we're starting to look at the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is this book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. It's not often said enough. The Big Book is not a novel, and it's really not anything like a self-help book. What it is a textbook. It was meant to be a textbook for us to study on how to work the 12 steps, which are the set of instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol making our life unmanageable. Merely reading the Big Book without experiencing it is useless. Although you might get a lot of really nice information, if you don't do what the Big Book is telling you to do, it's like trying to learn how to swim without jumping in the water. The only way that you can learn how to swim is to jump into the water and then practice, 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 practice. The cover page of the Big Book states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. I do not get involved in the controversy of recovered versus recovering. All I can say is I see the word recovered in the book. If anybody has seen it, I can't think of any place where the word recovering is. Yet so many people will say, well, I'll never be recovered. I'm always recovering. Well, the book says we have recovered. And what that means is that the problem is removed. I don't have to make a choice whether I drink or not because I don't think about drinking. I automatically turn to God instead of booze. It's no longer an option to solve my problems. Selfishness and self-centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful. And my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new and peaceful ones. Which then brings us to page 784, rather, of the book, which states that the 10th step promise has become a way of life. And that states, and this is such a powerful promise, because it states that we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. I was always at war with the world. But what this says is, for by this time, sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We had not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react, so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. And to jump over to page 27, it defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Then if we jump to the appendix, which is the spiritual experience, it describes recovered as a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism, has manifested itself among us in many different forms, as well as the foreword to the first edition states, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And it later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. So we are going to be working today, picking up on the 10th step, but I'm doing a very high level brief overview of what we've covered so far, which is where we started at step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. This is the self-knowledge part. I know I'm an alcoholic. Okay. However, as a real alcoholic, the only thing this self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after another. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which brings us to step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. The main thing about step 2 is we basically ask ourselves this question: do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than me that can solve my problem? If I say yes to that question, then I'm ready to move on to step 3. But I have to really be willing to believe. I have to be able to answer yes. If I'm not ready to answer yes, then I have to do more work and looking at myself, like, what do I believe in? Because if I don't have that belief in a higher power, I'm going to be stuck. And what we have to remember again is that 12 step recovery is not self-help. The root of self-help is the notion that I can help myself. The root of the 12 steps is that I cannot help myself, and trying to help myself only gets me deeper into my addiction. The key to this program has nothing to do with me and everything to do with my higher power as I understand my higher power. And therefore, I have to hit my bottom so that the only thing I can do is scream out to that God or that higher power to help me. Once I'm there, then I can take step 3. Step 3 is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Step 3 is only making that decision. I am not capable of turning my will and my life over to the care of God yet. I have some work to do. And that work starts with the 3rd step prayer, where I'm offering myself to God, where I'm asking God permission. I'm asking God, may I do thy will always? I'm asking God to take away my difficulties, where I realize I'm all caught up in the bondage of self. So now, once I make that decision and I ask God if I can do God's will, then I'm ready to see what it is that I've got to work with. That brings me to step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This is where we start to see what is causing our problems. There are 4 inventories: an inventory for resentments, fears, and harms, 2 for harms, 1 excluding our sexual conduct, and 1 including our sexual conduct. And we went through and we looked at these inventories, because what we're doing is we're identifying what our character defects are. And what we found, and this is from pages 64 and 65, in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? And that boils down to these parts of self. The self-esteem is how I feel about myself. My pocketbook is my money or my finances. My emotional security is how safe I feel in the world. My ambitions are my plans. My personal relationships are how I interact with other people, as well as my sex relationships. And then this boils down to us looking at ourselves. From page 67, it states, where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them and placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set the matter straight. And this branches out into these 5 main character defects, in that I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, I'm self-seeking, I'm frightened, and I'm inconsiderate. And these are the main character defects. And then we actually branch them off into some other character defects. And that's important because we have to look at really narrowing them down. Because what happens to us as we live our life, we repeat what we don't repair. And that means that the same situations repeat themselves over and over and over again. and we continue to be unhappy and wonder, why does this always happen to me? We always find ourselves in the same situation with different people. And this happens because our character defects come into play. It's not the person that's listed in your inventory that's causing your unhappiness, but it is your character defects. So when we look at our character defects, we get them listed on our inventories, which then makes us ready to do step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. We typically sit down with our sponsor. Now, it's important to remember in step 5 is done so that you can see what's blocking you off from your higher power and what's causing your problems. The purpose of step 5 is to have those things that are blocking you off revealed. And then when we talk about from the instructions for 4 and 5, which are the steps that deal with us, are complete here. Now it's time to move to step 6 and 7, which is where a shift takes place. This is where we start talking to God and looking to Him for His help. Starting with step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So if we can answer to our satisfaction, in step 6, then if we can answer to our satisfaction, we can look at step 6. We've emphasized the willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we've admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go of, we ask God to help us be willing. And therefore, when we did step 6, the main thing about step 6, the main thing about step 6 is understanding that we've got this list of character defects. We listed them. We wrote them down. Then you answer that question. Do you want them removed? If your answer is yes, great, you're ready to move on to step 7. However, if you're not quite there yet, then you need to do more prayer work and ask God to help you be willing so that you can answer that yes to that question. Once you answer yes to that question, then you're ready for step 7. Humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. And this is where we say to God, okay, God, I'm now willing. Remember, we made a decision in step 3. Now, in step 7, we're now willing that God should have all of me. All right, the good and the bad. I'm praying that God remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. So we did the listing of the defect asset table where we looked at our character defects. We looked at the opposite. So now what we're doing is we're getting nudged from God. And each morning we add to our prayers, we'll say this little prayer like, please, God, stop me from being the character defect and teach me to be the character asset. And we do this for each one of our character defects. So, for example, if I have the character defect of being a procrastinator, please, God, stop me from being a procrastinator and teach me to be someone who does what needs to be done immediately. And then the important thing to remember is to act as if you're someone with that asset. Remember, God will not immediately remove your defects. Nature abhors a vacuum. And if the character defect is removed and you don't have the right thing to replace it with, something that might not enhance your life has a chance to creep in and be the replacement. God will give you many opportunities to practice the character asset. When He thinks you've learned enough, then He'll replace it and remove the character defect. And this is ongoing. The use of step 7 in step 10 is where the remaining character defects get removed, which is why I still delve into this in 7, because we're doing the same things in step 10. So, because what happens is we live our lives shaped by our habits, which is a past action repeated often enough that it becomes automatic. As an alcoholic, our fight or flight response gets triggered more easily than other people, and our character defects have been repeated over and over and over again, that they're automatic, they're unconscious, and it's a response to having a part of ourselves hurt, threatened, or interfered with. But now in our life, they have outlived their usefulness. We have to remember, and we went over this stimulus response model. When we're reactive, we have to separate that stimulus from the response. And we go into that circle of concern and the circle of influence. Remember, this smaller circle represents the things that we can influence. The larger circle represents the things that we have concerns about, which is the serenity prayer. So when we say the serenity prayer, that's what we're doing. We're using the serenity prayer so that we don't react to that stimulus and that serenity prayer. We draw upon these 4 endowments of the human personality of self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will, which is going to help have an influence on the results or our response to what goes on around us. Step 7 and the use of step 7 in step 10 teaches us not to react inappropriately to everyday situations, which we might misinterpret as threatening. As an alcoholic, I overreact. I misinterpret things that are going on around me. So step 7 starts to teach us the things that are unmanageable in our lives, the things that upset us, the things we're afraid of. And all of them are caused by our distortion of what's actually going on around us, are giving more credit and attention to those things than they deserve, and then having our character defects come into play to try to protect us. Steps 8 and 9 are the steps used to correct the wreckage of the past. All of these steps up to this point have to do with the wreckage of our past, the wreckage that we caused as a result of our drinking. Therefore, step 8 is we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 8 is making your list and becoming willing to set right the wrongs of the past caused from our drinking. No other action is done in step 8 other than praying for the willingness to do what you need to do in step 9. Going over, we put everybody on index cards. So you go over your index cards with your sponsors so you can see how to do your 9th step apologies and make restitution. And to whom and how you do this is to ensure that you're not creating any further harms. And that's where you kind of divide them up as to who can I make amends to immediately, later, and then the last one is no way am I going to that person. And then we deal with it. So that's when we get to step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. An amend involves making restitution where appropriate. Restitution is paying back your debts, changing your ways, and in many cases it does include an apology, but it's not just an apology. An apology without changing your ways, or where needed, making restitution, is not really making an amend. Just saying I'm sorry and doing nothing will not get you any closer to your higher power. The main thing is to amend your ways so that you do not cause this harm to anyone ever again. So we do step 9 to set right the wrongs of our past. and to clean up our side of the street. So once we do step 9, we're done spending any time feeling guilty. If some people we have harmed choose to hold on to their pain, or if they choose to bear a grudge, even in the face of our sincere request for forgiveness, we must realize we're free from the burden of the wrong, and whatever they do, they do. When you completed the previous 8 steps, you're going to be a different person than who you were at step 1. Each step gives you the strength to do the next. So after doing step 7, some of your character defects will have either been removed or diminished, and you have the experience of acting as if you're the opposite. So when you do step 8, even if a step 9 doesn't go smoothly, you want to set the right the wrongs from the past, because now you have God in your life, and you believe and you realize rather that the outcome of everything, including your step 9 amends, are totally in God's hands. And by this point, it's okay. And these are, of course, the 9th step promises, which we hear a lot. And I'm not going to read them all, but it basically boils down to God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves, which then now brings us to step 10. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. This is where we have entered the world of the spirit. And our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. It's not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. So we still have to watch out for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when they crop up, and they will, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance is our code. Remember, it states we ask God at once to remove them. This means we go to God at once. It doesn't mean we tell God to immediately remove them. We do a step 10 as soon as we notice that twinge that tells us that something is not quite right. The nightly review is not step 10. The nightly review is part of step 11. Step 10 is done immediately. It is your higher power's way of giving you a chance to act as if you're the opposite of your character defects. Once you get to step 10, you stop doing that step 7 morning prayer of asking for the character defects to be removed and being taught their opposites, because in step 10, God decides what you're going to work on, and he'll give you the opportunities to learn the lessons that you're supposed to learn. Step 10 is doing the same things that we did in steps 4 through 9, but while what we did originally for steps 4 through 9 was used to clean up the things from the past, our drinking, step 10 is used immediately to clean up things as they happen moving forward. So step 10 is a very important step, because this is where we start to become recovered. Remember, when you start doing step 10, your life is not all of a sudden going to hell. What's happening is God is putting you in situations where you can learn to be the opposite of your character defects. So you want to learn those lessons, because each one may not be as gentle as the previous one. You don't want to ignore them. You don't want to ignore those opportunities. Remember, you made that decision to let God be in charge in step 3. You gave God permission to mold you into who he wants you to be in step 7. In step 10, he starts that transformation and will do what he needs to do to get your attention. So make sure you're paying attention. By doing steps 1 through 9 properly, you've removed the things blocking you off from your higher power. And now there's nothing interfering with you receiving messages, lessons in step 10, and guidance in step 11 from your higher power. Everything happening in step 10 is from your higher power to either teach you something you need to learn or to protect you from something in the future. Without this realization, there's nothing to ever be upset about. The gift for believing this is peace of mind and finding a quick, easy solution to every situation you find yourself in. So we have in the workbook, as well as on the Google Drive, the step 10 worksheets, which are basically the same as the fourth step inventory forms, except because it's the same process. But they say step 10 instead of step 4. So step 10 is use the moment anything disturbs your peace of mind. And it doesn't matter if it's a small inconvenience or a giant hit to your ego or anything in between. Any resentment, fear, and or harm disturbing your peace of mind interferes with your connection to your higher power. So you want to do a step 10 for resentment whenever you're upset or feel hurt. Even though we've been sober, we can still get resentments. They still happen. For a fear, whether you're worried, concerned, and afraid, we can still have fears come up. We get worried about something, we get concerned about something, or a harm, whenever you have a mean thought or whether you have a mean thought or actually hurt someone, is a harm. So now when we look at these step 10 worksheets, we'll start with resentments. What we're basically looking at is, who am I mad at? Why am I mad? Did it affect my esteem, my pocketbook, my emotional security, my ambitions, my personal relationships, or my sex relationships? What was my part? What did I do to get the ball rolling? What I said, thought, or did, or didn't do, say? Was I selfish, self-seeking, frightened, inconsiderate, or any other character defects that allowed me to do that? So when I look at column 1, I write down who I'm upset with. Column 2, why I'm upset with them, what they did, what part of self was affected. Was it my self-esteem, my pocketbook, my emotional security, my ambitions, my personal relationships, my sex relationships? And then in column 4, I write down how I got the ball rolling. And in column 5, I put a check mark as to whether or not I was selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, frightened, inconsiderate, or I would write down any other character defects here. Then I go down to the bottom where I talk about, we do that exercise where we reverse the resentment. If I was not whatever that character defect is, I would not have done what I did going through the whole process, which we learned in step 4. Then if that makes sense, then you do your step 6. You ask yourself if you want to have God remove that character defect. And if yes, you ask God to remove the character defect. Oops. Then we're going to look at the and that takes care of the resentment portion. If it makes sense, you just move on. You do step 7. You ask God to remove it. Next, we're looking at a harms inventory. So the first thing we're looking at is, who did I harm? What did I do to them? What part of the self got satisfied? Remember, in the resentment inventory, rather, the parts of self get wounded. In the harms inventory, the parts of self get satisfied. So remember, what part of self got satisfied by this? So you do a harms inventory when you have a mean thought or if you're actually causing harm. So you would list who you harmed. And if you did the step 10 resentment inventory, you'd look at column 4 of the resentment inventory and see what was listed there, if there was a harm as well. So basically, you write down who they are, how you harmed them, And then you write down the parts of self that got satisfied by doing this. Was it your self-esteem, your pocketbook, your emotional security, any one of those areas? Then in column 4, you write down what you should have done differently. Also in column 4, you'll write down what you'll do in the future. And then you add the character defects that allowed you to do that harm, the harm that you did in column 2. You write those character defects here in column 5. Then, if it's an inventory on harms using sex, you would ask yourself if you created jealousy, suspicion, and or bitterness. That's what differentiates the harm inventory excluding sex to the one including sex. Did you create, did it cause jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Next, we look at column 5 and then ask yourself if you want God to remove these character defects that you just found. If yes, you ask God to remove the character defects and teach you to be the opposite, and then you act as if. You act as if. So then you immediately apologize to the person as long as it doesn't create another harm, saying something along the lines of, I'm sorry, you write what is in column 2. I should not have done that, and in the future I will put what is in column 4, and if needed, you make any needed restitution. Then you amend your ways so that you don't cause this harm again in the future. So that is the harms inventory. And bear with me, I'm going to do the fears inventory. Remember, in column 4, you have to look at those behaviors that you're going to change. These are the things that you're going to do the next time you find yourself in this situation. And in column 4, it's your action plan of how you're going to start behaving moving forward. And then when we come to our fears inventories, in our fears inventory, you want to do a fear inventory whenever I say I'm worried, afraid, or concerned. So in column 1, what you do is you write down what you're afraid of. Also, look at your resentment inventory and your harms inventory, if you did them beforehand, and look at column 5, was frightened checked off on either or both forms, or were any of the behaviors or reasons you got upset based on a fear. If so, you'd need to add these to the fear inventory. So now in column 2, you write down why you're afraid. In column 3, and this is a little bit different from some of the other fears inventories that I've seen. But again, what I'm asking myself is, do I realize that I'm relying on myself rather than on my higher power? Am I relying on myself rather than God? Yes or no? Just check it off. Check off the appropriate response. Then in column 4, you write down everything you can think of that you can do to make sure that this fear does not happen. In column 5, you write down what character defects would keep you from doing what you need to do in column 4. Maybe you're selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, inconsiderate, or any of the other character defects that we have. So then you want to review what you wrote in column 4 and see what actions you can take to ensure that the fear doesn't happen, and then do them immediately. Also, you want to look at the character defects that you listed in column 5 and ask yourself if you want God to remove the character defects you just found. If yes, ask God to remove the character defects and teach you to be the opposite. Then act as if you possess that character asset. call your sponsor with the character defects, and your column 4 action plan. The main thing is to start doing and continuing to do the things listed in column 4 and incorporate them into your daily life. So after you complete steps 4, 6, 7, and 9, parts of step 10, after all the inventories, what you need to do is step 5 and call your sponsor with those character defects. And I'm going to push forward, and then we'll have some time in a little bit to have some discussion. So if you have any questions or anything, hold them and we'll get to them. Every resentment and every harm is ultimately caused by a fear. The step 10 fear inventory is used every time you're worried, concerned, or frightened, and it should be used as a companion inventory when you do a resentment or harms inventory. Now, some people carry some of these forms around with them for quick access and put them in a little notebook. Another way might be to keep a small pad of paper handy and draw 4 vertical lines. Another thing, I mean, a lot of people, they no longer use the forms, they just do it in their head because we've been doing it for so long. Another option for folks who are technologically savvy is there's plenty of apps you can download onto your phone, which we didn't have back in the old days, but there are apps that you can use for these inventory forms. And there's also another one that I recently joined, which is called the Sober Sidekick. And I found that one very helpful when I was away a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, I don't have it on here, but just remember Sober Sidekick. It's another really good one. And again, in the beginning, when you're first doing this, you may need to have the forms and do the written inventory at night. But as I said, over the years, we can do them in our head. We learn this stuff and it becomes a part of us. It becomes a habit. But the end result of being willing to follow these instructions and actually doing this work is what brought me to where I am in my recovery. And I thank God that, over 10 years ago, when I had 30 something years, I heard people who were doing this work, and people shared with me how to connect with some of these workshops, because there's a lot of people that I guess the problem is they don't want to admit that they don't know how to do the steps, so they just tell you don't drink and go to meetings. I don't know. But anyone who works these steps as they're outlined in the big book will reach the place that Bill describes as being rocketed to the 4th dimension. And that will be reflected not in everything they do and say, but in their relationships and how they lead their lives. Now, there's a big thing. There is a difference between steps 10 and 11, and it's important to recognize that step 10 is done immediately to clean up things as they occur. In other words, I catch myself. I say, whoops, excuse me, I'm sorry, let me start over. Sometimes it can be as simple as that. Step 11 is done at night as a review. So step 10 is the continuous fine-tuning of who I'm supposed to be. It's God's way of putting me in the situations. This is where it's living life on life's terms. And that's the difference between step 10, I do it immediately, and step 11 is reviewing, planning, and being guided. That's what step 10 is. That's where God teaches me the lessons, and step 11 is where I put them into practice. So when I'm going from step 10 to step 11, I want to be content with whatever life brings me and view everything as an opportunity to deepen my connection with my higher power, which is the thinking that leads me to step 11. Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's Prayer for Mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.